Easy answers are a sweet poison. You are here for the dangerous truth. This is Questions Have Power. I am the Curator. You have been granted access to the scholarly sanctum. Here, you are not a viewer. You are a juror. Weigh the evidence. Prepare your verdict. I will return to interrogate the silence before the record is sealed. The investigation is open.
Within the scholarly sanctum, case GN-06.04 is convened. The conflict is divine cleansing or systemic failure. Juror, the court warns you against judging the defectors for a transgression you execute daily. Exhibit Prima, the anatomy. Dr. Vance, the court demands you reconcile the etiology of the fallen ones without utilizing the sanitized Sethite genealogy as an escape. Substantiate the breach without appealing to the safety of mythological sanitization. Reconcile the incursion with the juror's active liability. The dragon's vanguard is on the stand.
The investigation prosecutes the record. Tradition perjures the evidence by sanitizing the defectors as giants. The sanitization is witness tampering. The record demands the juror identify the defectors as the seed of the Serpentine Diviner. The rank signifies the terrestrial vanguard of the dragon's seed war. Juror, you currently operationalize the systemic mechanism of the descent. The juror functions as the biological host of the Serpentine Diviner's etiology. The philological autopsy mandates a casting down. The defectors are not tall men. The defectors are the Serpentine insurgents. The defectors established the mandate of the fall to overwrite the divine statute with the Serpentine seed. Juror, the crisis is not just an ancient crisis. The crisis is the juror's crisis. The juror is not a witness to the breach. The juror is the biological site of the Serpentine Diviner's etiology. The juror is the host. The philological weapon proves a sovereign descent from the divine council. The event was not a marriage. The infiltration was an act of methodological violence against the human structure.
Dr. Vance, the juror must adjudicate the logic vice. If the divine geometry is porous, the juror faces a terminal crisis. Is the Creator incompetent, failing to secure the borders of the forge? Or is the Creator complicit, permitting the infection to validate the subsequent slaughter? The juror must sacrifice divine sovereignty to save divine mercy, or sacrifice mercy to save sovereignty. The juror must choose a heresy. Dr. Vance, you prosecute this event as a cosmic infiltration. This advocate asserts this crisis is the existential necessity of the divine excision. The text demands a clinical extraction, not a charming conjecture. If the hybrid contagion is a geometric flaw in the framework, the flood is the clinical response to ensure the continuation of the sovereign purpose. Observe the external witness. The men of renown were the catalysts who corrupted the protocol. By identifying the external witness, the court substantiates that the breach was cosmic. The sages of the East prove the contamination was methodological.
The court mandates a collision of hermeneutics. Advocates, you are enmeshed in the epistemological incongruity of your own construction. Dismantle the rival structural geometry before the record is sealed and the proceeding escalates. Prosecute the breach.
Dr. Finch, you ignore the tactical reality of the record. If the divine sons of the council are merely human men from the lineage of Seth, why does the text demand the total eradication of the biosphere for a marriage violation? The hermeneutic of suppression constitutes an act of theological perjury designed to insulate a sanitized record. Dr. Finch, you serve an ecclesiastical statute. I prosecute the forensic evidence.
Charming conjecture, Doctor. If the jury accepts your premise that the divine council was inherently insecure, the court is forced to adjudicate the Creator as incompetent. This logic does not save a sanitized hermeneutic. The argument saves the integrity of the divine construction from your chaos. The deluge was not a visceral eruption. This cataclysm was a clinical preservation of the messianic path.
The record remains indifferent to sentimental subjectivity. The 1611 authorized King James Version is silent on the transmission of the Watchers. This silence constitutes an adverse inference. Dr. Finch, must the court adjudicate the Creator withheld the tactical evidence to insulate the jury or to facilitate the excision of the juror? The record demands a verdict on the silence.
And yet, Dr. Vance, you assume the dragon outmaneuvered the deluge. Weigh the existential cost of your own clinical realism. You demand that the record validate an abortive sanitation. I identify the deluge as the clinical forge where the human geometry was distilled. The Watcher class provided the trial. The Maker provided the structural bulwark to ensure human survival.
A fortification that was compromised, Dr. Finch. If the transmission of the defectors was so effortlessly assimilated into the human construction, the breach was not merely somatic. The failure was methodological. You framed the encounter as a trial. I identified this incursion as an asymmetrical war where the human lineage was never granted authorization to comprehend the existential jeopardy.
Dr. Vance, you speak of divine entry as if the Maker is a distant magistrate. I distinguish between a breach and an authorized intersection. If the human construction were not interrogated by the descent of the fallen ones, the human lineage would never have forged the fortitude necessitated for the terminal restoration. The intricacy of the divine structural geometry necessitates the integration of the adversary.
This rhetorical redirection constitutes a terminal distraction. While you, Dr. Finch, conjecture regarding the inevitability of the adversary, the record in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, aligned with the Ugaritic cognate for the fallen ones, substantiates that the seed was compromised. This compromise was a structural fracture in the divine construction. To characterize the incursion as an authorized intersection is to condone the forensic violence.
This clinical logic constitutes no mere mitigation. This methodology is a calculation of the highest order. Dr. Vance, you must adjudicate. Is the Creator a forensic restorationist performing surgery on a corrupted lineage, or a systemic excisionist attempting to salvage an abortive masonry? Prosecute the irreconcilable bifurcation, Dr. Vance. Is the messianic statute a clinical victory of the divine geometry or a desperate systemic patch for a compromised construction?
The record for Exhibit Prima is provisionally sealed. The court transfers the evidentiary burden to the structural intensification of the breach. Escalate the proceeding. Exhibit Summa, the progression. Juror, distinguish between a clinical purgation and a theological obscuration. Weigh the cost. If the deluge was meant to disinfect the biosphere, why did the water merely act as a transport for the defectors? Dr. Vance, the court demands you reconcile the resurgence of the fallen ones without conceding that the deluge was a foundational fracture in the divine masonry.
The record demands you, juror, acknowledge the deluge as an abortive fortification. Dr. Finch characterizes the cataclysm as a clinical purgation. I identify a permeable construction. If the Serpentine Contagion returned in Numbers, chapter 13, verse 33, the deluge was no weapon. The cataclysmic torrents functioned merely as a sieve. Juror, weigh the evidence. The recrudescence of the seed of the Serpentine Diviner, the terrestrial dragon, constitutes a jurisdictional impeachment of the deluge's authority. If the Serpentine litigant compromised the lineage a second time, the promised seed becomes a structural impossibility without a second extraction in the land of Canaan. Juror, this structural collapse substantiates that the deluge was not the foundational protocol. Dr. Finch, if the surgeon fails to clear the infection during the inaugural forensic maneuver, the forensic culpability is yours. Is the forensic restorationist institutionally deficient, or is the wound left open by structural geometry? Account for the defect. Juror, identify the breach. The 1611 Authorized King James Version remains silent regarding the tactical syllabus of the defectors. This silence within the record constitutes an adverse inference. By excising the tactical transmission of the watchers, the redactors perpetrated criminal witness tampering to insulate an expurgated hermeneutic. This subtraction was no mere linguistic rendering. The exclusion constituted a theological concealment of a failed lustration.
Dr. Finch, the court demands you validate the intensification of the breach without appealing to the insulation of divine obscurity.
Dr. Vance characterizes the recrudescence of the fallen ones as a secondary incursion. I identify the intensification within the land of Canaan as the secondary debridement of a persistent contagion. The record demands you, juror, proclaim the serpent as a persistent litigant, not a victor over the divine construction. The conflict within Canaan was the forensic sequestration of a pathological threat. The progression of the record ensured the terminal insulation of the seed. The divine geometry did not fail. The construction intensified to meet the magnitude of the breach. Dr. Vance, is the legislator a failed mason, or does the systemic excisionist permit the symptom to resurface to prove the terminal necessity of the messianic statute? Juror, adjudicate the distinction between a structural failure and an ontological trespasser. The evidentiary payload extracted from the archive, the ancient cognate for the dragon, the coiled serpent, substantiates the legislator's dialectical hegemony. The construction is not permeable. The framework is adaptive and forensic. Dr. Vance, your postulation regarding a structural flaw requires a deity caught in cognitive dissonance. My logic demands a creator who is prosecuting.
Advocate, the chronometric cusp of this recurrent adjudication is imminent and inviolable. Enact the surgical jurisdictional impeachment. This is the liminal forensic aperture to disarticulate the record before this jurisdictional epoch is statutorily fossilized against you. Enforce the prosecution.
Dr. Finch, the hermeneutic of the theological structuralist has disintegrated into a logic vice. You postulate the Great Deluge as a prophylactic surgical intervention. However, the clinical resurgence and proliferation of the contagion within the southern Levant constitutes forensic evidence that the divine physician failed to achieve total marginal clearance. In any forensic jurisdiction, a physician leaving the infection inside the patient while claiming success is guilty of clinical malfeasance. Your methodology necessitates the acknowledgement of the systemic failure as structural negligence. Reconcile the malfeasance. Is the divine physician forensically insufficient, or did the Creator intentionally maintain the wound open for further trauma? Does the Creator possess the jurisdictional deficiency to seal the abyss, or did the Creator leave the breach open by design? The record demands a verdict on the culpable intent of the surgeon. Dr. Finch, substantiate the result. Is the Creator the savior or the saboteur of the lineage? Neutrality constitutes an act of intellectual cowardice.
Dr. Vance, you conceptualize the divine geometry as a sealed inner court. You distinguish between a failed excision and a scheduled escalation. The presence of the defectors in the Levant was not a surgeon's error. The return constituted a probationary trial in the grand prosecution. The sovereign physician authorizes the pathological recidivism to re-establish a parasitic presence to substantiate the terminal necessity of the messianic statute. The record mandates a clinical adjudication concerning the forensic framework of the restorative crisis. The systemic masonry is not porous. The framework is calculated to forge the fortitude of the seed. The conflict in the Levant was the forensic removal of the Serpentine Insurgency, mandating that the territory remain a sanctuary for the promised seed. The divine geometry never functions through thaumaturgic caprice. The systemic construction escalates strictly via statutory and forensic protocols. The divine protocol, reclaiming the divine image from the defectors, constitutes an act of bitemporal war.
Dr. Finch, you demand the adjudication of a foundational geometry unsubstantiated by the evidentiary record concerning the post-Diluvian resurgence. If the Great Deluge failed to achieve clinical lustration, the comprehensive eradication of the biosphere constituted superfluous carnage. The burden rests upon you, Dr. Finch, to substantiate that the systemic construction maintains forensic coherence while the serpentine contagion continues to manifest within the parameters of the historical record. Substantiate the theological liability of a framework necessitating the clinical throat-cutting of the biosphere for an abortive outcome.
Dr. Vance, the coherence is found in the escalation. Each intervention, from the flood to the conquest of the Levant, is a statutory requirement in the prosecution of the serpent. This investigation executes the reclamation of the divine image from the defectors who attempted to overwrite the foundational protocol. This is a battle for the integrity of reality. You must adjudicate if the deluge was a failed sanitation or a necessary tempering of the human framework.
Dr. Finch, weigh the existential cost to the reality of the juror. The Watcher class codified the precise etiology of the Serpentine mandate that the juror executes today. Whenever the juror operationalizes the pursuit of hidden knowledge outside of the demarcated perimeters, the juror executes the mandate of the serpent. The dragon did not lose in the water. The Serpentine Diviner moved the theater of engagement from the external geography to the internalized seat of human volition.
Dr. Vance, the internalized seat of human volition is where the redemption is sealed. By statutorily reorienting the theater of engagement from the external biosphere to the internal teleological intent, The Creator necessitates that the biological host adjudicate the divine framework over the antagonistic protocol. The pathological resurgence of the fallen ones was not a failure of the flood. The return was the preparation for the terminal verdict. The juror is currently the defendant in this jurisdictional dispute.
Dr. Finch, you demand a verdict that requires the forensic suppression of the evidentiary record. The redacted record of the ancient Book of the Watchers substantiates the breach. The curriculum of the defectors was systemically expunged from the 1611 authorized King James Version to insulate the juror from the terrifying reality of the dragon's tactical logic. The omission was not a translation. The exclusion was a forensic obfuscation of the breach. The record demands a verdict on this silence, Dr. Finch. Does the maker withhold the operational evidence to insulate the juror or to precipitate the juror's destruction? Is the archive a library of truth or a liturgical sanctuary for the perjured? The silence of the 1611 authorized King James Version constitutes an adverse inference of criminal concealment.
Dr. Vance, the expurgation of the apocryphal texts yielded no forensic obfuscation. The systemic excision was the statutory codification of the canonical record. This analytical interrogation mandates no evidentiary codex of the defectors to substantiate the structural hegemony of the divine framework. The record demands a verdict, Dr. Vance. Was the lineage statutorily preserved, or did the Ophidian protocol subsist parasitically within the anvil of the law? Does the divine masonry demonstrate absolute structural impermeability, or are you defending a theological atavism?
The advocate's time has expired. The record for this exchange is statutorily sealed. Dr. Vance, you are forbidden from rebuttal. We expedite the docket. The record for Exhibit Summa is sealed. The investigation interrogates the fractures. We initiate the cross-examination, inquiries from the deliberation room, the curator's selection. Advocates, the curator has codified the structural anomalies. Account for the forensic incongruities of your testimony before the record is escalated. The deliberation room has requisitioned the record. We authorize the cross-examination. The jury demands the reconciliation of the structural anomalies. Advocates, orient yourselves for the jurisdictional impeachment of your positions. Inquiry 1. Juror Elias Thorne in Oxford, England. Dr. Vance, the court demands you reconcile the philological autopsy of the fallen ones with the physical report in the Book of Numbers, chapter 13, verse 33, without assuming a scribal error. Is the record describing a biological anomaly or a failure of human courage to name the cosmic breach?
The preoccupation with anatomical stature functioned as a tactical feint to distract the human testifiers. Fearing a physical titan is more palatable than acknowledging the forensic incursion of a superior cosmic intelligence. This intelligence has already compromised the human perimeter. Juror, render a verdict. Is the juror terrified of the proportions of the defectors or the reality that the serpentine transmission is currently operational within the juror's own teleological seat?
Dr. Finch, the assessment.
The physiognomic expansion of the fallen ones demands the materialization of a cosmic overflow. The somatic density is not merely stature. The mutation testifies to the forensic protocol of the defectors. Dr. Vance views the record as cerebral camouflage, but I distinguish the anomaly as the actual masonry of the breach.
Forensic Inquiry 2. Juror Ella Abraham in Jerusalem, Israel, interrogates the record. If the deluge was a clinical victory, why was a second excision in Canaan forensically necessitated to re-establish the structural equilibrium of the lineage? Dr. Finch, the court demands you adjudicate this indictment. Reconcile the clinical resurgence of the infection without utilizing the shield of divine obscurity.
The second excision proves the depth of the infection. The divine framework does not work by sorcery. This divine masonry operates through forensic precision. Each clinical extraction constitutes a necessary step in the statutory progression of the grand case toward the ultimate restoration. This post-diluvian return of the anomalies in Canaan provided the anvil upon which the fortitude of the chosen lineage was statutorily forged.
Dr. Vance, the assessment.
If the Great Deluge functioned as the clinical triumph Dr. Finch asserts, then the Book of Numbers, chapter 13, verse 33, constitutes the forensic evidence of an abortive lustration. The secondary excision in Canaan proves the contagion persisted as a systemic malignancy. The Ophidian infiltration was merely submerged beneath the cataclysmic torrents to facilitate a subterranean transport of the protocol. This divine framework remains demonstrably porous. The Maker failed to reinforce the masonry of the human lineage. The divine physician merely engaged in a recurring rhythm of violent containment to mitigate a structural failure. The Serpentine protocol persists as a subterranean malignancy within the somatic vessel of the juror.
Forensic Inquiry 3. Juror Julian Voss in Berlin, Germany, interrogates the record. If the Watchers gifted the human lineage the masonry of awe as a breach of the cosmic chain of custody, does contemporaneous metallurgical artifice constitute a divine mimesis or an Ophidian escalation? Advocates, the court prohibits the sanctuary of neutrality. Justify the etiology of this technological escalation without utilizing the refuge of a secular hermeneutic or the safety of evolutionary progression.
The contemporaneous masonry of ore constitutes the terminal progression of the Watcher etiology. The human species has not ascended. The human lineage has merely scaled the ancient breach through systemic theft. The current extraction serves as the terminal saturation of the Watcher transmission. Juror, you are not constructing a future. The human lineage is polishing the dragon's weapons. From the masonry of ore to the weaponization of concentrated light, the juror utilizes the tactical etiology of the defectors to construct a reality that bypasses divine authority. Contemporaneous artifice is not a reclamation of the image. The Serpentine protocol is the juror executing the mandate of the fall with lethal velocity.
Dr. Finch, the assessment.
Dr. Vance, you are weaponizing nihilism to obscure the statutory record. The primordial foundation is the manifestation of the Maker, not the Serpentine defectors. The Watcher insurgents merely subverted the protocol of the foundational elements. The human lineage currently prosecutes a forensic battle to expropriate the specific instruments for the divine purpose. The teleological intent defines the breach. This contemporaneous instrument remains a neutral vessel within the divine framework. Dr. Vance, you must adjudicate. Is the artifice inherently corrupted by the fallen origin, or is the Maker's foundation so absolute that no incursion can effectively despoil the masonry of the forge? Choose your heresy, Doctor.
The cross-examination is sealed. The evidentiary testimony is statutorily preserved. We now transfer forensic custody of the investigation to the curator in the archive for the forensic profile.
Juror, this clinical profile constitutes no mere historical manifestation concerning antediluvian aberrations. This forensic audit prosecutes your immediate existence. The structural breach identified in the ancestral record is no inert archaism. The incursion signifies the protocol of the serpent that you operationalize today. Does the forensic profile represent a high-intelligence infiltration of the human framework? If the text serves as a subpoena for your belief structure, how do you adjudicate your own complicity? Juror, we must perform a clinical dissection of the internal masonry regarding the descended insurgents. What is the forensic function of this structural breach? The methodology requires evaluation. Does the creator function as a clinical practitioner performing a radical excision, or a builder attempting to fortify a failing masonry? Which path demonstrates superior intellectual honesty when confronting the anatomical breach of the human lineage? Does the record demand submission to a theological obscuration or a verdict on a forensic crime? The investigation mandates an interrogation of the silence within the 1611 authorized King James Version. The systemic lacuna constitutes clinical evidence tampering. Juror, if the record remains mute, what redacted etiology is the text concealing from you? Does this silence constitute an adverse inference of a cosmic cover-up? Does the silence exonerate the Creator or indict the divine physician for the forensic violence of the deluge? Perform an autopsy on the redacted record to expose the potential for a criminal omission. Interrogate the silence. The audit asks the forbidden question: if the curriculum of the Serpentine sages remains active in your own desire for artifice, are you a victim of the breach or an accomplice to the Ophidian infiltration? If the messianic blueprint necessitated the throat-cutting of a biosphere, does the geometry demand your worship or your subpoena? You must render a judgment. Does the presence of the dragon prove the framework is broken, or that the construction constitutes a trap? The present anomaly forces you to weigh two profound risks. Is the acceptance of a compromised human lineage more dangerous than the theological structuralism of a violent restoration? Juror, consider the cost. If the serpent survived the water, the deluge was not a clinical stabilization. The cataclysm signified a histrionic display. The burden of the verdict now shifts to your immediate existence.
Juror, the tribunal issues the critical forensic mandate. You are not voting on your preference, you are voting on the evidence. Silence is a criminal abdication of your duty to the record. This proceeding demands an immediate verdict. Render your judgment or accept the forensic liability of your own silence. Charge number 1, the verdict on the system. Was the Divine Council a secure hierarchy, or was the framework inherently fractured, authorizing the sovereign descent of the defectors? Hierarchy or fracture? Charge number 2, the verdict on the agent. Are the fallen ones biological anomalies, or are the defectors high-intelligence entities who successfully compromised your own human protocol? Anomaly or intelligence? Charge number 3, the verdict on the method. Does the 1611 authorized King James Version provide a transparent record, or is the authorized version a redacted codex designed to conceal the dragon's tactical logic from your own inquiry? Transparency or concealment? Charge number 4, the verdict on divine complicity. Weigh the forensic cost of the biosphere's throat-cutting. Was the cataclysm a restorative lustration of the human seed, or does the systemic carnage substantiate a protocol of divine incompetence? You must adjudicate the surgeon's intent, sanctuary or slaughterhouse. Charge number 5, the verdict on the evidence. Does the post-flood return of the Contagion prove the dragon's victory, or does the Canaanite conflict signify the forensic excision of the Serpentine Etiology within your own reality? Victory or excision? The foundational evidentiary sources are sequestered within the case file infrastructure of the digital record to facilitate your perpetual forensic investigation. The tribunal authorizes the inquisitorial summons for dissent. This formal proceeding necessitates an uncompromising clinical exactitude commensurate with the forensic vivation prosecuted within the scholarly sanctum upon the foundational text. The juror is not encumbered by the arguments presented. If the juror discerns the logic of Dr. Finch or Dr. Vance to be structurally fractured, consign your dissent within the deliberation room. The forensic profile is entered into the record. I affirm that this proceeding within the scholarly sanctum has been conducted with uncompromising forensic rigor. The record is now sealed. Juror, proceed to the deliberation room below. Secure the official ballot. Render your judgment on every charge. This case file is permanently open for deliberation.